Today on Locked On Red Wings, a 2024 draft profile on center Michael Hage of the Chicago Steel with Will Scouch of Scouching.
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. I'm formerly a broadcast producer for 97.1 The Ticket, where Scotty's the host over at Locked On Tigers, as well as a freelance journalist for the Detroit News. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning guaranteed. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And we are happy today to be rejoined by Will Scouch of Scouching, the return of Will Scouch. He went off the grid for a little bit, but he is back for the 2024 draft season, and we're happy to have him break down center Michael Hage with us today. But first, before we get to that, Will, what have you been up to, and what are you doing now? How are you doing? Just all the small talk questions we can think of right off the bat.
Yeah. I mean, it's good to be back. It's always a pleasure to be back with the Pancake Boys. I missed you. You know,
what an era that was, man.
Yeah, I know. What a time that was. No, I've been good. I was away for about, 8 months or so. Just stepped away from public work, started a company on my own time, and have been trying to work directly with teams and everything. I'm actually going away to Montreal this weekend to a hockey tournament, the Golden Bucket Tournament in Montreal, to get some NCAA and U Sports grads, and hopefully some jobs over in Europe. A lot of European GMs are going to be there, so it's going to be a lot of fun. And I think it'll be streamed live, actually, if I'm not mistaken. So that's going to be a good time. But yeah, no, it's started a company, and I miss doing the public work. The private stuff wasn't really a whole lot of NHL draft stuff, but I kept going on that and started watching this class and figured, you know what, I'll just come back and focus on the NHL draft publicly and the rest of the stuff privately. So it's been a nice balance, and it's lovely to be back. I missed the podcast circuit and draft season. It's a lot of fun.
We're happy
we
to
missed
have
you.
Back.
Well,
yes, we did.
We missed you.
Well, thank you.
So we're having you on today. I've kind of already teased it a couple times. We're having you on today to profile center Michael Hage out of the Chicago Steel of the USHL. I guess the first thing I want to ask you about this 6-foot right shot center is, what are his biggest strengths?
Well, I mean, he's definitely a guy who leads with his skill. This is a really, really just high skill guy, and he wants to use it. Like, there's a lot of confidence with him. He really attacks the ice, going up the ice. He's a very northbound player. Really loves to move the puck up the ice in some way, shape, or form. And then, in the offensive zone, just try to create offense. He does it in a variety of different ways. And that's the thing that I kind of really like about him is, yeah, he scored a lot of points, and you love to see a guy who scores points, but the ways in which he can generate offense, there's a lot of just really good things that he does. Just a very well-rounded offensive mindset. And yeah, I mean, in terms of just pure skill and fun factor, like, and the way that he uses it, you can have a lot of really skilled players, but they kind of over depend on it or really lean into it and take on too much risk or something like that. And Hage kind of doesn't do that quite as much. Like, he'll use skill to get pucks around guys or find a passing lane and put a pinpoint pass off the boards to someone in the neutral zone. Like little things like that are kind of hard to pull off well. He does that kind of thing really well. And so, like, yeah, very skilled player, but I think the way that he uses it is really smart. And in the offensive zone, he can do anything you want in the offensive zone. Off the puck, he'll go to the net. He doesn't stick to the perimeter. There's just a lot of really good projectable traits there with him for sure.
One of the things that has been talked about a lot with him specifically, I feel like, is skating. That's something that pretty consistently comes up. Is that something that stands out to you as well? I mean, you mentioned kind of skill first, and I guess skating could be skill, but is a little bit more on the physical side of things too. Is that something that jumps out to you as well?
I would say not as much as other players, and I'd say that that's the one area where I think I would want to see a little bit more development with Hage. I think him being he's a guy who really does. He kind of has a bit of trouble like generating a lot of speed quickly, especially when play is kind of slowed down. In my work, that's kind of exemplified defensively, like in defensive rush situations and such. He's not really much of a factor. He can get left behind really easily. Guys get around him and through him in the neutral zone. And that's, I mean, for a high scoring offensive guy, I think the pros outweigh the cons with him. But that is something that I think highlights maybe a little bit of a gap in his game, but it's not like he's a poor skater. I mean, again, when we're talking about skating, there's a bunch of different disciplines that players can be strong in or deficient in. And, if he's just wheeling up on his edges and using crossovers and everything, he uses his body weight well, he can generate speed that way. But let's say he intercepts a pass in the defensive zone. His strength isn't really from a standing start gunning up the ice like that or anything like that. He'll try to use his skill first to try to solve that problem and get through it. But I wouldn't say it's a great skill of his, but I wouldn't say it's like a poor one that I think really hampers his potential.
So before we got on here, we were just chit-chatting, and you mentioned that in this draft class, there are a lot of players that have flaws. I mean, that's every draft, but like more so than usual. Like it's not as top-heavy as you would expect. What would you say is Michael Hage's biggest flaw as a center?
I mean, I think as a center, the way I kind of view the position is like you do have to have your best skaters on the team up the middle. They just have to cover so much ice. They have to chip in offensively, but also be a threat on defensive rushes in the defensive zone, help out their defensemen. And with Hage, I mean, I don't know if I see him as a center in the NHL, but I don't think that's a bad thing. In the same way, not saying these two guys are on the same level, but it's kind of like watching Tim Stützle when he was in Germany, where he was playing center over there, and you could kind of see like, yeah, he's fine at that position, but in the NHL, it's going to be a different story. And I would sort of see him more as like, put him on the top line on the wing, give him the keys to the Ferrari, and just go, look, you're a dynamic offensive guy. Go out and score points for us, and we'll plant someone else up the middle. Now, Ottawa's tried to make Stützle a center, which, I'm sure you could do with Hage. I can't say it's impossible. But for me, it's like hedging your bets and saying, I still think this guy could be a really good winger if things don't work out at center, because I do think the defensive side of the game is where things are not as strong with Hage. And it's in a way where it's like, I think there's enough work to be done there where maybe being a winger and just letting him sort of lean into the offense a little bit more would be the way I would tackle it. But not to say he can't be a center, and I'd see how things go over the next year and a half. He missed a lot of time last year, kind of took some time to pick up this year. But I still feel like he's been somewhat of a similar player throughout this entire season. He's just scoring more. And I would say projecting him as a center is a little bit tricky, but it's possible. It's feasible. I can't say it's not.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Scotty.
No, you're good.
No, I was just going to head to an early break, but if you have one more quick one, we can.
Well, I don't know if it's quick, so you go to the break.
All right, we're gonna head to a slightly early break. When we come back, Scotty will hit Will with another question. Right. So stay tuned to segment 2 of Locked On Red Wings. There is no I in team, but there is one in Indeed, and that's the hiring platform you need to build yours. When you're hiring, you need Indeed. They are the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place instead of spending hours on multiple job sites searching for candidates with the right skills. Indeed's a powerful hiring platform that can help you do it all. They streamline hiring with powerful tools that find you matched candidates. And with Instant Match, over 80% of employers get quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job, according to Indeed Data US. So join over 3 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Start right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Offer good for a limited time. Again, claim your $75 credit now at Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Indeed you do.
Indeed you do. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. We have Will Scouch of Scouching on, breaking down a draft profile on center Michael Hage of the Chicago Steel. And just before we went to break, I rudely interrupted Scotty, who is on the verge of asking probably what I would guess the most important question of the podcast.
The greatest question maybe that I've ever asked, actually.
Anyone
in the
has ever
history of
asked.
my tenure here. Yeah. More so than when we ate pancakes in front of the camera for like 3 hours and Tony Ferrari was 2.5 hours late. So my question is, you mentioned it a little bit before, honestly, in answering Brian's question there before the break, but the Wings draft strategy in the Yzerman era has just been so focused on, if you get a forward, make sure they have the potential to be a two-way player, right? Like be solidified and be strong on the defensive side of the puck. And you had mentioned that there were some shortcomings defensively. Is that he's just always going to have shortcomings defensively and there's kind of nothing that you can really do about it? Or is there, certainly there's room to grow to an extent, but is there a path for him to be that profile of player, I guess, that Yzerman has really been trying to hone in on in his tenure?
Well, I would say it's not impossible. I think the good thing about him is that this is a guy who at least tries to be involved defensively. Like you can see that, in transitions defensively, he's, his involvement in those situations is pretty solid for a forward. Like it's not spectacularly, he's not a buzzsaw flying around out there constantly hunting the puck, but he puts himself in a position to at least challenge puck carriers and everything. It's just that the results aren't quite as good as a lot of other forwards, especially for what you would like in a center. And I think a lot of that, honestly, and it's kind of like after I saw him 4 or 5 times, I could kind of tell when a situation was coming where I felt like someone was just going to get right through him. And usually it was just a guy making a quick skill move, jumping to one side a little bit. And Hage just didn't have the foot speed or that agility to close that gap. And he would end up with sort of a softer sort of stick tap to the wrist and hope that the guy would lose control of the puck rather than stepping in and really sort of, clogging that lane, which I think is not uncommon either, right? Like younger players at this level, like especially who play as much as he has, I don't think it's that uncommon in my experience, but it is something to note. And I think what you said about kind of what Detroit looks like, part of the reason I highlighted Hage for this episode was because he is a little bit different from what Detroit, from that ethos, right? Like he is that offense guy. The high skill, really creative, like really, really, really creative. And if you focus on the positives and sort of, if you lift the skating ability, I feel like the rest should come into focus even more because his defensive play, like there is engagement. It's not like he's disengaged if he doesn't have the puck. It's just the results aren't there right now. So I don't think it's impossible, but I do think that if I'm making a development plan for him or something, that is, if I'm focusing on things to improve, there aren't many with him, but I think that's one where I would definitely focus. And I think that would definitely unlock a lot for him, even beyond college.
Well, just for context for people, he had 75 points this year with Chicago Steel, 54 games played, 33 goals, 42 assists, and he is committed to play with the University of Michigan, it looks like, in the 25-26 season, according to Elite Prospects, so we'll get a closer look at him here in Michigan if you watch college hockey. But the follow-up I have to your last statement, Will, and we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, is a lot of the prospect rankings have him ranked going somewhere between 20 and 30, with the Bob McKenzie's ranking having him going as low as 36, so the second round. I want to ask you, would this be considered a bit of a reach to go for someone like Michael Hage? And then if it is, and since you don't believe he is projected as a center to begin with, more so a winger, why not go for the plethora of wingers that are projected to go in the range that the Red Wings are sitting at?
I think it's just this season, it's extremely hard to kind of project who is going to go where. I think there are players who I have in my top 15 or so that the Red Wings will have a chance at. Obviously, if I have 15 players, they're gonna at worst have the option of the 15th best one, right? So there is a possibility. He probably will not be the best player available for me on paper, but the thing about Hage is that there's just so many guys in this year's draft who all have gaps in their game and a lot of uncertainty, and I think it just opens up so wide, so fast this year that not anything, but there are a lot of situations where you could go, let's take a chance on this guy. And with Hage, I mean, the real thing that interests me is the diversity of his skill set. Like, there's just something about him that is different from a lot of the sort of skill guys, the pure skill guys in this year's draft. There might be guys who are faster, guys like Luke Misa or Andrew Basha. Those guys are faster. They're more exciting, I would say, and they're more of like a high pace player. But Hage is a guy who brings a lot of determination. He's a guy who doesn't really seem to take shifts off. He finds ways to create offense in a lot of different ways. He'll go to the net. He can be a tipping threat. He's a shooting threat from mid-range. He doesn't take crappy shots from the perimeter. Like, this is just a really well-refined guy who I think has some things that need to come a ways. And I feel like if you focus on him defensively and him getting caught flat-footed sometimes and all of these things that show up in data and probably in scouting reports too, then I can see how a source like Bob McKenzie would have him a little lower. But for me, it's like in the soup of guys that I have ranked from 10 to 20 or into the mid-20s even, like, it's kind of take who you like and see who you value. And when I think about the Red Wings, like, they've drafted a lot and they have a lot of different dudes in the pipeline. And I think that a just pure firepower guy who, again, you mentioned his production. I think since January 1st, he's been up towards like a 1.8 points a game or something. Like, he's been up to like if he played a full season at that pace in the USHL, I think he'd have 100 points, which is no small feat. And I think that that's to be noted. And I think a lot of that does come from just the fact that he's a guy that you can run the puck through. He's determined. He's confident. There's a lot of skill. And he's a dual threat guy. It's not just playmaking. It's not just him getting scoring chances himself. He's a guy who, like, I saw him make a play where he's at the top of a triangle in front of the net and he just one-touched past from the top of the face-off, in the middle of the face-off dots, faked a shot and turned it into a pass to the guy at the far post, and easy tap-in goal. Like, you don't see plays like that from a lot of guys at this age, and you don't see that kind of a play very often at all. And I know it's just one play, but it's just one example of the kinds of things he's able to do. So to me, yeah, I think on paper you might see him get drafted at 15 and go, whoa, that might be a little something. But you know what? The other thing too, development matters. And I do value the fact that this is a guy that you can leave in college for a year, 2 years, 3 years. He's going to a good program in Michigan, assuming he stays on that train. I think he's going to do well there. He may have a good first season, but not a spectacular one, but I think he only gets better. So I think there's a lot of other names that maybe the Red Wings could go for that would not surprise me at all, but that's not the case. That's the case for every team this year. I think there's just a lot of guys who are all in the same world and just do different things well. And I just look, I mean, for me, the main thing, I look at him and go, well, he kind of brings a lot that I don't know if Detroit has a tremendous amount of, even if he isn't the like super fast, high intensity guy. So yeah, I mean, he's probably on the lower side of a player on my board where I'd really sort of think about it if I'm Detroit, but I do really like him. And I think he brings a lot of really good, interesting talents. And he has been just searing hot down the stretch. And I do think there is something to be said about players who were injured last season, didn't play a whole lot of games. I don't think when he came back, he quite looked like a first-round player. He kind of seemed a little bit behind the play, but that happens when you miss most of the season. And then this year, he kind of took some time to get moving. But there is something to be said about guys who in the back half of the year or the last 2/3 of the season just start to really get things settled and figured out. And assuming he stays healthy, I don't see why he doesn't come back next year a better skater. And if he does that, I think there's a lot of sort of IQ and hockey sense and the way he feels out the game things, those traits I think that he has really in spades that will benefit him. So I feel like he could be a guy that, yeah, you might reach on him a little bit, but over time, I think he'll be a guy that I think you look back and go, yeah, we took a chance, but like we got a really good offensive player out of him. I think it's entirely possible.
Well,
Iserman does not care about reaching on general public perception.
Of course.
There's
no.
If there's one GM in this sport that could not care less about whether it's like a reach, quote unquote, or not, it would be our GM. For sure.
I think 3 of the last 4 years he's taken a guy who was projected to go slightly lower, right? Like you had, I guess, 3 of the last 5 years, right? Yeah. You had Cider his first season, and then Danielson
Kosa
and Casper.
Over Wallstead.
Kosa
Trading
over
up
Wallstead.
Kosa when Wallstead was on the board is
he goes for it. He goes for it.
So far it hasn't bit us in the butt. We're hoping that it stays that way. It's only benefited us with Kosa. Jury's still out on the other guys. We're going to do another quick break. When we return, we're going to finish up the conversation on Michael Hage. I also have a question about the 15th overall pick in general for you, Will. And it's going to be a little bit of a blindside, so sorry for that. But stay tuned to segment 3 of Locked On Red Wings. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are joined by Will Scouch of Scouching as we break down Michael Hage, center for the Chicago Steel. Scotty, you're up to bat, buddy.
Yeah, no, well, you kind of alluded to it there at the end again, but one of my Trey Augustine's a big talk of the town here because he goes to MSU and he's accessible for this fan base. We love watching anything that Trey Augustine is a part of. And so if he does stay on that path and go to U of M, I guess specifically, I want to ask you what you are looking out of him at the college level and at U of M. Is it specifically and as easy as just like, I want to see him improve defensively and see if the skating gets better now the injury's healed, or is there, more that you are kind of looking out in his college tenure, however long or short that is?
I think the big thing that could really make a difference for him, we've talked a lot about the skating and all of that. I would like to see them keep him at center. I'd like to see him try to develop into that type of a player, because I do think that the way that he stitches plays together, the way he passes the puck, and the dual threat offense he has, I think if he could pull it off as a center in the NHL, that'd be great. Yeah. I think the other thing, though, that I kind of have seen a little bit is, he does have a lot of determination. This is a guy who is really confident. You can tell he challenges players one-on-one. He really, he tries to push deep into the offensive zone on his own. And at the USHL level, he can get away with it, right? Like he'll find ways to sneak a stick through a pair of legs and get pucks into the middle of the ice somehow. He'll have that, next, this skill move didn't work. I lost control of the puck. I'll find a way to wrestle my way to it and make a play of some kind. Which is great. You want to see that out of players. But I do want to see like when that thing that doesn't really go his way, which happens also quite often, is that a thing that also comes a ways in college, right? Like, yeah, the skating can develop, but how does he deal with close quarters offense? How does he deal with getting through layers of pressure of guys that are a lot older than him? Because it's a more physical situation. It's just very different. And that is the ultimate test for a lot of skilled players, is how they handle physical resilience from bigger, older players. Sure. And him, I think he'll if I'm his coach, I'm not telling him not to try, right? Like I'm going, look, you're going to probably need to learn and evolve and keep going at this and get stronger and all this stuff. But it's going to be about keeping him, and finding that balance of like knowing what to do and what not to do, because he does put a lot on his own shoulders. And part of that, I think, is because of Chicago themselves. They weren't the best team this year. And he kind of put them on his back and carried them to the playoffs, which he can do. But it's going to be a matter of where he settles as a player that I'm really curious about, because he has the talent to do quite a lot, but the strength and the skating ability at higher levels, I'll be very curious to see those evolve and how it affects his game, both offensively and defensively, I think.
Absolutely. I do have a question. I teased it going into the break about the 15th overall pick in general. And we were chit-chatting again before we recorded about how, while the Red Wings really lack a true blue chip prospect, and a big part of that is because they were screwed in the draft lottery year after year after year to the point where the draft lottery got changed. So now that they can never take advantage of the system that once screwed them, but that's a whole different rant, which I can do any given day of the week. Just ask. But now that they have a cabinet full of very good prospects, right? Your Carter Mazers, your Nate Danielsons, your Marco Caspers, your Kosas, they don't desperately need any one position.
Yeah.
So my question then is as just as much as there is a reality where they can do something bold with the 15th overall pick in terms of drafting a guy, could they also do something as bold as the 15th overall pick as trading out of it, either up or down? How much of a reality do you think that is for the Detroit Red Wings?
I mean, I watched a bit of the Red Wings this year, here and there. They're a team that strikes me as they're not that far away from taking a good step. And if there's a deal out there, look, at the 15th overall pick, generally, you hopefully cross your fingers and you get a very useful middle of your lineup guy. That, if you set your expectations of we have a first round pick, we want a franchise guy, I think you're going to be disappointed a lot. If you sit back and sort of go, all right, maybe we can get a guy that plays in our middle of the lineup, provides an offensive punch like Hage. There's a lot of guys in this draft where I'm sort of going, yeah, I feel like they could be good third liners, sort of, middle of the lineup players, forwards, defense. And Detroit does have the luxury of being quite flexible with what they want to do here. I wouldn't be in a rush to trade that pick because I do have guys ranked quite high that I think that Detroit could add there, like a Teddy Stiga at 15 would be another reach, but every time I watch him, I adore watching him play, and I feel like Red Wings fans would just love him. And that's a guy where it'd be a reach, according to the public out there, but I think he would be a really great option, and I think he's a good player. But trading the pick, it really depends on what the holes on the NHL lineup are, because if you have holes, that's how you can fill it, right? You don't draft to fill your holes of your current NHL lineup, especially in the middle of the first round. So to me, I look at it and go, well, it depends on what they're getting, but I don't think it's impossible for Detroit, right? They've drafted so much. They have, their first round picks next year and the year after as well. They have all their seconds as well, I think. They haven't traded much away in the way of draft capital. And I think they're a team that is pretty close to taking a step, if not, I really hope they do, because it's about time. They've been rebuilding for quite a while now. And that's no disrespect. I really want to see the Red Wings in the playoffs, right? They have some pretty good players in the pipeline. So if it means turning a corner and sort of saying to themselves, we're kind of done with this, let's add a body that we think can really help us out now. And it's also a middle of the lineup guy that helps them. Or if they're trading down, I think this is a good year where you could trade down and get some good value. Then that's also a possibility too, right? And that would probably be the way I would take it. But you guys know better than me about Detroit, right? The types of players you could get in the middle of the first round with the value of that pick from another team, what player you could land, I don't know. But I think it's entirely possible for sure.
Yeah, and for context, the Red Wings have 8 picks this year, 8 picks next year, and then all 7 of their own in 2026. So they have picks to give if need be. But you make a good point, right? It's it really, for me, it comes down to timeline. How fast does Steve Yzerman want to make that step into the playoffs? Because if you think, Steve Yzerman's goal here is not one cup and done. He wants sustained success, right? So he's trying to build a team that can stay with a cup window from multiple Stanley Cups. So I guess it comes down to what he views as most important. If he thinks this team is ready to take that step into the playoffs now, personally, I could absolutely see him dealing 15 for a guy, and anything else that would be required for an impact player. He did it last year, right, for Alex DeBrincat. So in my opinion, I feel like Yzerman's saying we're ready to make that step, so I see it as a reality. But on the same note, if that's not the case, then one of the biggest needs I think they have is they need a top 6 forward, and you can get that with the 15th overall pick. It would just be years away.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. And I think there are a lot of guys this year, especially, who do bring a lot of skilled offense. There's, they have flaws in their game, but there's a lot of skilled offense available. And a lot of the thing too is you don't have to draft a lot of skilled offense super high. A lot of those guys kind of slip anyway. I don't think Hage is going to slip, but later in the draft, you've got the option of guys maybe like a Teddy Stiga in the second round, a guy like Luke Misa beyond that potentially, a guy like Andrew Baja, where you have no idea what really is going to, I don't have a clue what's going to happen with him. And all those guys are 5'9", 5'10", 5'11" or so, but they're rambunctious, they're high pace, they're high skill, and they have some flaws, but those are guys you could get later, and they may be top 6 or bust, maybe top 9 or bust, but still, I think they're good players and they can take you a ways. So even if it isn't Hage, I think this year's draft, you have a lot of potential to land something in that range as well. And I do agree. I think that is something that the Red Wings and their pipeline kind of do lack a little bit, going after guys like Casper and Danielson and those kinds of players. Like, there just isn't. Those guys are good players. I like those players, but there's a firepower element that I think is a little bit absent. I don't know if that's just not a high priority for them as an organization. I can't say, but at the end of the day, like, that is a gap that I see, and a guy like Hage fills it. But there's also no shortage of other players that probably will be available there. A Trevor Connolly might be a guy that slips to that range, and he's a guy that I would look at before Hage, but I also get the feeling that 15 might be a little low for him. I don't know. He'll be in that range maybe, but that's a guy who also brings a lot of offense. He's not a center, he's a winger, but there's stuff there too. So there's going to be a lot of choices, I think, for Detroit to make. And I don't think many of them are like the wrong choice, but we'll probably have to just see what they do on draft day.
Absolutely. Scotty, you got anything else for Will before we let him go?
I don't think so.
Awesome. Do you have any final thoughts?
We ball.
We ball. There we go. Will, tell the people where they can find you and your work.
Yeah. So you can follow me both on Twitter and YouTube largely. We also have a TikTok channel now at Scouching, so you can check those out. We also at Scouching.ca as well is a website that I'm running. Lots of access to, we got a Discord server. We've got data tables for draft prospects, players that have already been drafted, NHL data, all kinds of toys that you can play around with. I also run Fractal Hockey, which is a company devoted to player analysis for NCAA players. Any player really looking for a job anywhere, mostly Europe or going to college or whoever, or helping organizations do that stuff. But yeah, I mean, those are the two main things. I'm a writer also for puckpreps.com, so you can check out Puck Preps if you're interested in guys on their way to college. That's largely the focus, or CHL draft players. Like, if you want to read about players born in 2010, that's where you can go to do it. So check those all out.
That's so wild.
I know.
Keeps himself busy, clearly.
I try.
Will, thank you again so much for taking the time
As always.
Yeah,
join
thanks
us.
for having me.
We'll be having you on tap for several more episodes leading up to the draft, I'm sure, because there's a lot of players to get through and a lot of options for the Red Wings at 15. Yep. And plus, it helps us fill our off-season content calendar, so we take advantage of that anytime we can. So yes, thank you so much. We will be back with a new episode on Monday, recapping the Grand Rapids Griffins game, and hopefully they survive to see Game 5. So stay tuned for that Monday. Same time, same place. It's your team every day.